May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. You may have seen in this week's e-blast, or read on the cover of your bulletin, that we're entering the season of creation. This is a global and ecumenical movement, meaning across all different Christian denominations, that invites us to dwell with the sacredness of God's creation for the 5 Sundays in September. It's also a time to grapple with the spiritual complexities of climate change, taking seriously the human-made dimensions of this crisis. This year's theme is to hope and act with creation. How might things change if we relate to creation as a gift rather than a resource? And even more, how might we partner with creation in living out the gospel? This is the lens through which we read today's gospel passage from Mark. We encounter Jesus in an all too familiar situation, at odds with the Pharisees, yet again. They criticized Jesus' disciples for eating with defiled hands, that is, unwashed hands. The parenthetical from Mark explains that Jewish law mandated people wash their hands before eating, and he also mentions that there are other traditions, such as washing anything taken from the market, or washing cups and pots and bronze kettles. And honestly, these sound like great ideas to me, so I can't fault the tradition there. But did you notice that Jesus himself is not criticized by the Pharisees? So presumably, Jesus did follow the tradition of washing his hands before eating. Why then did he push back so strongly? We get some insight from Andrew McGowan, an Anglican priest, historian, and the president of Berkeley Divinity School, which is the Episcopal seminary at Yale Divinity School. He explains that the ritual of washing hands before eating was part of the Pharisees' broader vision of making temple purity accessible to all Jews, not only to priests. McGowan writes, the Pharisees, still a rather new school of Jewish thought in Jesus' time, formulated the remarkable suggestion that priestly purity could be obtainable by all Jews all of the time, and that this was a means of coming closer to God. It is an appealing, impressive idea, and the basis of most of what we know today as Jewish theology and practice, a democratizing, egalitarian, and serious approach to religion that decentered the rituals of the temple and took the spirit of worship into any place, time, and person. I know you might be tired of hearing it from me, but I'm going to give the Pharisees credit where credit is due. What McGowan calls a democratizing, egalitarian, and serious approach to religion is really attractive to me. And Jesus doesn't actually dismiss the Pharisees' idea, but he does redirect it. He says, look, you've got it wrong. Nothing coming from outside a person can defile them, only what comes from within. Then he gives us this list: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. So just pause here. Whenever you hear a list like this, remember that the religious culture of Jesus' time was obsessed with purity, especially sexual purity, which honestly is just as prevalent in 21st century Christianity as first century Judaism. The question of what was pure or impure, or whether one was defiled or undefiled, was of utmost importance in order to participate in religious and community life. This wasn't some abstract theological sensibility. Our traditions, as rich and beautiful as they are, can't anticipate what the future holds. The Pharisees could not imagine a world as populous and developed as this. They couldn't imagine a house of worship with a subway underneath. They couldn't imagine fracking or oil rigs or single-use plastics. If we hold too precisely to teachings, even if they offer great wisdom, we will always fall short of bringing to fruition the fullness of God's dream for the world. Adherence to tradition is no substitute for spiritual transformation. So rather than honing in on this list from Jesus word for word, let's consider the underlying ethic. Jesus is calling us away from objectification. The things he names, these actions and dispositions, violate others and denigrate their inherent worth. Theft, licentiousness, slander, these flagrantly disregard the imago Dei, the image of the divine in which we all are formed. I encourage you to think of this as it applies to all creation and all creaturely bodies, not only humans. It's pertinent to remember, especially in this season of creation, that we are all created in goodness. We're told in the first chapter of Genesis, the very first words we read in the Bible, that when God formed the world and all creatures, including humans, God said it was very good. That very goodness, that connection to God, that connection to creation, precedes anything else. It is the first and central truth of our lives. It unites us to God. It unites us to each other. And it unites us to the pigeons outside and our cats and dogs at home and the iguanas in the rainforest and everything else. Goodness and love create the basis of our faith. It's easy for anyone, especially those of us with a lot of shame and restriction in our religious backgrounds, to replace one broken paradigm with another, to go from beating yourself up for feeling sexual attraction to beating yourself up for not recycling enough. But the Christian life is not merely about changing actions. That would actually be so much easier. The Christian life asks for a total shift in how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. Paradoxically, believing that we are good and loved can be the most difficult shift of all. St. Isaac the Syrian, a 7th century bishop and theologian, offers charming and profound insight into spiritual transformation that is undergirded by love. In the Mystic Treatises, he writes that it is our own experience of God's love that transforms our attitude toward creation. He describes a heart burning with love for all creation, even the demons and the reptiles. Love is the starting point for any real change. And change is important, don't get me wrong. This doesn't stop with some pretty words and feel-good platitudes. Just the other week, Canon Marie and I joined with an interfaith coalition outside Citibank headquarters, singing and praying and giving witness, urging Citibank to divest from fossil fuels. There are so many things that ought to be changed in our own lives and in the world that we share. But effective, sustainable change comes from the security of knowing we are loved. It's hard to love creation if we don't really believe that we are loved because we're part of creation. As St. Isaac tells us, love is the condition of the hearts of those who are becoming united with God. As we move through the season of creation, do me a favor and don't make any resolutions. I don't want you thinking, oh, composting is back in the city, I'm going to start composting. Or, you know what, I really need to pop the tabs off my cans and recycle those separately. Please don't do that. Not because they aren't worth doing, but because that is so not the point. We are part of the sacred goodness of creation. And as part of the sacred goodness of creation, this month is about letting that theological and cosmic reality really sink in. It's about seeing ourselves as partners with creation, not above it or in opposition to it. The reorientation of ourselves and our lives may be uncomfortable, especially as we consider the ways in which we've been complicit in harm, through our own personal choices and our participation in systems of exploitation and degradation. So remember, love leads us, not guilt or shame, but love. And get excited about how incredible it can be on the other side. What would the world look like if each of us had a heart burning with love for the whole of creation? For humans, for the birds, for the beasts, for the demons, for all creatures. May it be so.